Hey, this is Nick Matthews. I work for Amazon Web Services on the partner organization. I'm a solutions architect. And today we're going to talk a bit about Sophos and security in the cloud. As probably most of you have heard, security is kind of a big deal these days. Between all the different breaches across government and retail, financial organizations, it's becoming a lot more apparent that security is different than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. It used to be about some teenagers that just wanted to go on your website and put a funny message, and now it's turned into a full-fledged business, right? People are finding out that their data has value, and that these hackers and attackers can extract a lot of value from companies and individuals by accessing and sharing that data or holding it hostage even. And so a lot of companies aren't used to that level of security requirements. So we're seeing that people get surprised or that their own organizations aren't able to handle that security. And so we're seeing more and more investment into security because the business numbers make sense, right? Because people are starting to realize that consumers aren't going to come back to people that are breached, right? Target is a big example of that. And breaches are, as more and more data becomes digitalized, the value of that data is higher and higher, and it's harder and harder for companies to keep the attackers at bay. So obviously security is top of mind for a lot of people these days, which is where AWS comes in. So last year at our reInvent, the CIO of Capital One stood up and said that they can operate more securely in AWS than they can in their own data centers. We've been talking to a lot of customers about this, not just since then, but before then even. And we're starting to figure out that customers are figuring this out. So how is AWS different than your current environment from a security perspective? One is everything's automated, everything's API driven. And whenever you can do those kinds of actions, you actually prevent a lot of security problems, right? So when you can automate everything, that makes it easier to take action on everything at once and less things get missed. It also has to do with physical security, right? Inside of a current data center, it's hard to trust authentication because if you can get physical access to a device, you can take ownership of that device. And anytime you're operating your own physical data centers, there's usually a lot of people involved, and it's harder to do that. With AWS, there's no one except for AWS in those data centers, and it's very highly secured, which we'll talk about a little bit later. As well, security problems sometimes come out of complexity. When services are complex to use or complex to access or complex to secure, it's harder to secure those resources. In AWS, a lot of the things we do and a lot of what we focus on is simplifying things. And so when things are simple, it's easier to secure those things. And on top of that, since security is often our customer's number one concern, it's definitely AWS's number one concern. And so at AWS, we say security is job zero. And so we take that into our product design, our service design. So one of the top ways we do this for customers is to make it easy to encrypt. I don't know if you've tried it to do it in other locations or on premises, but sometimes a lot of stars have to align for encryption to work. And for AWS, for a number of services like S3 and RDS, we want to make it, and we have made it, as easy as clicking a checkbox. And so we allow you to do the right secure thing by default. We think that makes a big deal when it comes to security. And not just around encryption, but also authentication. So it's easy to allow someone to log in with plain text credentials or to sacrifice security in terms of ease of use. And while we do aim to make things simple, we never take security for granted. So if you take a look at the Internet of Things service that we have, for instance, that's one of those places where it's very easy to make IoT insecure, but we won't allow IoT devices to register our service unless they have support for TLS and certificates. So a lot of the IoT hacks you see wouldn't directly apply to our service. So we used to spend a lot of time with customers convincing them that AWS was secure. We're finding that more and more now, because of some of the stuff we just talked about in the last slide, because you can be more secure in AWS, that sometimes now the pendulum swung the other way, and customers believe that because they're on AWS, they are secured. And so this slide pretty accurately depicts where that line's drawn. So we basically secure the cloud itself, the infrastructure, the hypervisor, the infrastructure, the physical access, the buildings, all those kinds of things. And customers are responsible for securing the things they put in the cloud. Right? So if it's your data, it's your responsibility to make sure that that data is properly handled. Right? If you configure parts of the network, it's your responsibility to make sure you're configuring that part of the network to be secure, and you're not potentially opening it to the world, for instance. We will let you open up to the world because there's places where you need to do that, but that's what we call above your line in the shared security model. So the customer, and part of this, as we can see, is network security. So that's a lot of where we're going to talk today on Sophos. So how do you make sure that you can secure your data? How do you secure your operating systems and your instances? And how do you make sure that you're controlling your part of that? You may also see networking as part of our part of the shared security model. This is more like, how do I make sure that the physical access to the network is secured? How do I make sure that DDoS attacks for one of my neighbors, who's not me, doesn't affect me? Then that's the type of networking that we take care of. So this is a very important concept, right? Basically, the short story is, if you put it in the cloud, you're going to have to secure it. But if it's the cloud itself and a base service, that we're going to secure that. So, customers ask us, okay, well, how do you secure your cloud? One is, we operate at a magnificent scale of, so right now we've got, I don't know, one of the largest scales I know of, at least. We're definitely the largest in the public cloud providers. And so we're able to do things first in security at scale. And part of that is network access and physical access. We have what you would expect from a normal kind of network operations center, that we are monitoring that 24/7. But in addition, we also offer tools for customers to do their own monitoring. So for instance, every API call that goes into AWS goes through CloudTrail. So if something's changing in AWS, it's going through CloudTrail. So customers can use that as a definitive record of what's going on from at least a control plane perspective of their AWS resources. In addition, we're also working on services that allow customers to basically harness some of our expertise in security. So Amazon Inspector, which we released last year and is now generally available, allows you to run a point-in-time check to make sure that none of your instances and their operating systems and applications are vulnerable to any of the well-known CVEs. So you can do kind of a point-in-time check to see how you're doing. A lot of people end up integrating that into similar DevOps methodologies to make sure applications are secure before they go deploy. As well, we have a lot of ways to manage high availability in the cloud. So we just announced Ohio this week, in case you missed it. So now we have a US East 2. It's pretty exciting. That makes it our 14th region, and so 38 availability zones. Availability zones are effectively one or more data centers, and regions are collections of those data centers. And anytime you put data into one of our regions, whether that's Frankfurt for Germany or whether that's Ohio in the United States, data is not going to leave that region unless you ask us to replicate it someplace else. So that's important for data sovereignty and a number of different regulations. As well, since we've got more infrastructure than anyone else, that makes it easier at scale to handle things like DDoS attacks. So we can handle that ourselves, but we also offer tools to customers to handle that as well. So you can use things like elastic load balancers, which don't accept UDP traffic to thwart some DDoS attacks. But then you can also allow your infrastructure to dynamically scale along with the attacks. So we can use auto scaling, or if you're receiving DNS attacks, you can use Route 53. As well, it integrates with your existing resources. So we have services like AWS Direct Connect, which will manage your network connectivity into your WAN. You can manage your Active Directory into AWS, as well as if you've got a key management system or HSM, you're able to do that on-premise or in AWS as well. In terms of our certifications for building applications on AWS, we've got a wide range of compliance and certifications that we can provide paperwork and reports for. So whether that's FIPS and ITAR and FedRAMP for federal and government customers, or whether it's PCI DSS Level 1 or HIPAA, ISO 27001. We've got a wide range of these. We've got customers like FINRA, NASDAQ, and a number of government agencies like the FDA who have built workloads on AWS that can attest to the certifications as well. So I'm going to introduce Bryan Nairn from Sophos, and he's going to go through some of the Sophos details on security.
Thanks, Nick. We'll go ahead and get started here. Advancing to the next slide. Sophos began producing antivirus and encryption products about 30 years ago. And over the years, we've grown to become a recognized leader, not only in the endpoint protection space, but also through our security research with Sophos Labs and mobile data protection, Unified Threat Management, or UTM, which is what we'll talk about today. Now, back in 2013, we actually launched our UTM product in the AWS Marketplace in order to help customers protect their infrastructure, applications, and data in the cloud, as well as on-premise, which they may have already been doing. And today, our solutions help secure hundreds of thousands of customers across the globe, including organizations such as Under Armour, Pixar, Ford, and even Amazon. And we'll talk a little bit about the work that we've done with Amazon later in the presentation. And then finally, it's important to note that Sophos is an AWS Security Competency Partner. And what this means is that we've demonstrated success in building products and solutions that deploy into the AWS Cloud and that help customers secure their AWS environments. I want to go back to the shared security, shared responsibility model and revisit this just a little bit. So as Nick mentioned, AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud. And so that's everything below the yellow line, things like the physical security and ensuring that things are architected so that they don't fall over from a DDoS attack. But I want to reiterate that you are responsible for the security of the applications and data and the different workloads that you place in your AWS environment. And this is really where Sophos, and specifically Sophos UTM on AWS, can help out. And so Sophos UTM deploys in your environment, and we occasionally hear questions like, well, do I really need a Sophos UTM if I'm using security groups and network access control lists? And what I always tell customers that I'm speaking with is, let's say that you have a farm of web servers. So you've got your web workloads, and you've deployed them into AWS, and you place those in a security group. And you've got those locked down. It could be based on source and destination IP addresses or specific networks, as well as limiting the traffic to TCP ports 80 and 443. And this is definitely a good start, but this is where Sophos UTM can help. And we do that by inspecting the traffic and allowing you to enforce policy on the traffic traversing these ports and to these workloads. And so let's talk a little bit more about that. So Sophos UTM, it's a next generation firewall, and what protection does UTM provide? So it provides a modular security technologies in an all-in-one solution. And so you can use any combination of or all the security models, including the next-gen network infrastructure protection, web application firewall, intrusion detection and prevention, and advanced malware protection with advanced persistent threat protection with Sandstorm. And you can do all of this without having to integrate multiple point solutions, because we've done that work for you. And so what do we mean by next-gen infrastructure protection? And so this is really doing is this is your firewall technology. It's allowing you to create firewall rules and policies based on source and destination IP, based on port information. We're looking at the state of a communication, so the TCP sequence numbers, And the next thing would be web application firewall. So what does this do? This looks for things like cross-site scripting and SQL injection attacks. And then we have IPS, so intrusion prevention or even detection. If you don't want to do the prevention, we can just do the detection. And this is really based off a couple of different technologies, so signature-based detection as well as protocol anomaly-based detection. And then, of course, I mentioned Sandstorm, and that helps detect, block, and respond to the advanced persistent threats and zero-day threats. And so that's what you get with Sophos UTM in AWS on top of, say, security groups and your network access control lists. So one of the things that we've done with this offering is we've designed the UTM to take advantage of AWS services in order to help you scale the security protections that you need to the size and capacity of the applications and workloads that you're trying to protect. And so let me talk a little bit about how we're using some of the different AWS technologies. So with CloudFormation templates, you know that this is a really easy way for you to create and manage resources, and in this case, Sophos resources, and allowing you to provision and update them in a really orderly and predictable fashion. And then you look at ELB, and so we're using ELB to automatically distribute incoming application traffic across multiple Sophos UTM workers. And so we also do this in an outbound fashion as well. So in the case of Amazon Workspaces, we have customers using ELB to distribute outgoing workspaces traffic to the Sophos outbound gateway to ensure that the traffic is conforming to acceptable use policies. We take advantage of auto-scaling in order to help you maintain Sophos availability and allow you to scale Sophos UTM capacity up and down automatically according to the conditions that you define. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about was S3. We use S3 in order to store and synchronize configuration and log information across multiple Sophos UTM workers. So I wanted to talk about how you get started. It's really easy to get started with Sophos UTM. So you simply go to the AWS Marketplace, and you select the version that you want to run and the instance size, and then once you run through the configuration, so you can see some screenshots here, you basically select the version that you want, how you want to pay for it, what region you want to deploy it into, and then a couple of other options, including the instance that you want to run on, and then it just automatically deploys into your environment in minutes. And so then all you need to do is configure the modules that you want through the web-based UI. We do offer this as a free trial, so there's absolutely no risk in order for you to go ahead and try it out. You can try it out for a month for free. We also offer two different payment types, and that's very easy pay-as-you-go pricing, which you're probably familiar with utility computing. And then you can also leverage your existing investment if you currently work through a Sophos and AWS partner. You can purchase licenses from them, and so that gives you the opportunity to take advantage of some of the cost savings and discounts that you might get through that partner relationship that you have, as well as help with support, whether that be from an implementation or architecture perspective, as well as frontline support and getting configuration changes made. Okay, so I wanted to transition from talking about what it is to sort of how it's used. And I thought we would go through a couple of different use cases, and we'll talk about sort of the very simplest use case that there is, which is deploying a single instance in HA, and also talk about some of the inbound and outbound scenarios. And then also wanted to talk about Office in a Box, and I have a fellow Sophos employee from the product management side of the house with me, Rich Vorwaller, who will talk a little bit about Office in a Box. He and I actually both came over from AWS, and he's pretty well versed in that. There's also a really terrific presentation from reInvent last year, so when we send the slides out, you'll be able to take a look at that if that's something that you're interested in. Okay, so with the Sophos UTM single instance HA deployment, basically what you're doing is you're launching Sophos via a CloudFormation template, and we can support either cold or warm standby. And this really allows you to, at the very simplest level, very low cost, avoid a single point of failure, and it's designed to be installed across multiple AZs. So this provides for health monitoring and self-healing through auto-scaling in CloudWatch, and the Elastic IP actually migrates to the backup UTM in the event of a problem. And then, of course, as I had mentioned before with S3, the UTM synchronizes configuration data, license, logs, reporting, all to the S3 service. And so this is the very simplest way that you can get started with Sophos UTM on AWS. Okay, and then here's another scenario, and this is Sophos with auto-scaling. And so in this particular case, I'm talking about WAF, or Web Application Firewall. But you can use this in conjunction with the next-gen firewall functionality as well as IPS, and so it doesn't necessarily need to be WAF, but this is a great way to talk about it. And so again, it's launched via CloudFormation templates, and in this case, you avoid a single point of failure because what you have is you've got a Sophos controller, and then you auto-scale with Sophos UTM workers. And so these worker processes spin up on different instances and really scale based on the demand for capacity in your environment. So it really gives you the ability to provide elasticity for inbound WAF traffic in this case, and on the next slide we'll actually talk about outgoing web traffic through Outbound Gateway. So the UTM controller provides a single point of management and reporting here, and so you'd basically connect to that with a web GUI or UI, and then that configuration, any changes that are made, would be pushed up into S3, and then that would be synchronized across all of your UTM workers. And we'll go on to the next slide, and then I'll talk about how we do this from an outbound perspective, and then we'll go into Office in a Box, and I'll turn it over to Rich, and we can talk about how Amazon's actually using this for their corporate workspaces. And so with Outbound Gateway and auto-scaling, so essentially what we're doing is providing EC2 instances that are installed in your VPC, and they act as the default gateway for the internal VPC subnets. And so they use GRE tunnels to route outbound traffic to UTM workers, and they evenly load balance that outbound traffic across the UTM worker nodes that are in the auto-scaling group. And so this really provides for a nice, fast, automatic failover when there are multiple OGWs that are deployed in the VPC. And it also provides support for automatic and manual deployment options depending on how you want to have this architected. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Rich so that he can actually talk about what's been dubbed as Amazon Office in a Box, and how Amazon is using this in their corporate workspace environment.
Thanks, Brian. So the genesis of our outbound gateway kind of started from, of course, conversations we had with customers about protecting outbound connections out to the internet, but also a very interesting reInvent session that happened last year. So this session was given by Steve Mueller, and it talked about how Amazon, as its employees, are moving over to use workspaces as a remote desktop environment. And one of the challenges that they had was essentially, and I'm probably not giving the session justice, but it was essentially how do we authenticate, or how do we ensure that these remote users have the correct access to what they need when they're in these very either unknown or maybe even malicious networks. And so the conversation evolved from not so much bring your own device, but almost kind of bring your own network. And how do you really authenticate those users in that scenario? So in this session, they talk about several steps they did, and again, I'm not giving it justice. It's a very interesting talk. They talked about how they walked through the process of how clients would authenticate to the Active Directory through SSL, then they would have a what they called a broker session where they put a key rose token on the desktop that would allow it to authenticate, and then they would have a streaming gateway that would actually take out the workspace's stream and present it to the user. But where Sophos came into the scenario was in the authentication piece for network access. And so what they needed to do is actually get down to the IP level of a user to be able to say, hey, these are the network accesses this IP address can have, but as well as like here are the web pages or here are the types of the content or the web categories that a user can do. And the great thing about workspaces is through this design, they were actually able to get down to the IP address and create rules consistent to that IP address. So in a traditional world, you'd probably, if you had a remote user, you would use things like, MPLS or maybe VPN or things like that. But in this scenario, they're actually able to use SSL and just kind of the common web protocols and make a workspace as an extension of their network, or Amazon, an extension of their network, and actually go through and authenticate those users through the process that they had and then assign rules based on those IP addresses. So that started the conversation for us as well as, how could we use the content filtering aspect within Sophos UTM and to make sure that that would scale, of course, but also, work in these scenarios. And that was kind of the genesis of how the Outbound Gateway is. So again, I'm not doing justice to the session. It was a tremendous session given last year. We'll follow it up on our slides. And there'll be some pieces about the authentication that maybe not be applicable to all customers. But what we're hoping is that our Outbound Gateway really provides the users provides a solution for our customers that are looking for that content filtering and that restriction within their VPCs or within an AWS environment, that Sophos UTM can scale to that and also manage it for them. So let me turn that back over to you, Bryan, unless there's any other points you'd like me to cover.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks so much, Rich. And actually, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Sri from REAN Cloud to talk about how they're actually using Sophos and implementing Sophos in AWS environments for customers and helping customers secure those environments today.
Perfect. Thank you, Bryan. I actually didn't know that you were from Amazon also. It's like we have a full cast here. I was formerly with Amazon as well, at their public sector team. Since founding REAN, we've really taken a DevSecOps view because we fundamentally believe that the net gain in security using tools like Sophos and net gain in cost, all that is enabled when you can really leverage all the benefits of the APIs and infrastructure as software, infrastructure as code that Amazon Web Services offers. So we were founded in 2013, a cloud-native company. We've grown to about 225 employees. We are a Cert 100 company. Amazon kind of tracks these companies that have 100+ certifications. We have 10+ professional certifications. And really, it is bringing that enterprise mindset. Our focus is on, the regulated enterprise, financial services, life sciences, federal government. Bulk of my background is federal government. I see a lot of questions about FedRAMP and so on, and that's really exciting. So as a partner, Amazon recognizes the partners based on their competencies. So there are roughly, I believe, around 24,000 partners around the world, and out of that, there are about 45 partners or so that Amazon recognizes as premier partners. Out of that, there are probably around a handful of 5 or so that are DevOps Competency certified premier partners. But and they do a very detailed audit of our managed services, more importantly, not a traditional, ITIL-based, server-based managed services only, but also while practicing ITIL, are we implementing DevOps to do some managed cloud functions like tagging, billing, securities, all that. So how modern we are in terms of leveraging APIs when we're building our cloud management portals and so on. And if we combine all that with government reseller, life sciences competency, I think we're really the uniquely positioned partner to be able to help customers. And from a portfolio perspective, we help the return on investment, business cases, really with an emphasis on security and risk. And in that regard, Sophos is a very important component in our equation, in our strategy, which I'll cover a little bit more. But sometimes some of our partners have already gone through this, and they're hitting a problem like hey, we've grown, and now how can we operate better? How can we automate things? How can we enable DevOps in our operations? So sometimes they come in at the services level, and we really take a very agile approach to it, and a very startup mindset to the large enterprise, because all of us come from an enterprise background, but have that agile approach to the problems. So where do we come into play in this mix? So we talked about Amazon Web Services and Amazon being really one of the top cloud providers in terms of all the compliance it offers. There's a portfolio of compliance regimes that Amazon offers. And then above the hypervisor model that Bryan covered in terms of how UTM specifically, when we talk about different control families, from those that are asking questions about FedRAMP and similarly ISO 27001 or HIPAA, or even maybe a better way to look at it is the work that Cloud Security Alliance did in terms of mapping these compliances back into different common control families. UTM from a network perimeter threat management perspective, there are so many questions that people have, and I've seen some of these questions. Should I buy on the marketplace? Should I buy a bring your own license? What is the performance? I see some numbers, and we had very recently a very large customer, large software vendor that is getting ready to deploy like in the order of 25 to 50 clusters, and they had a lot of questions about how the performance works, helping them through that benchmarking process. There are definitely nuances if you're used to using Sophos on premise. There are some things that come into play when you move to Amazon, like the routing tables, how switchover works, and security is always a cost versus risk decision. You may not have all the sensitive data on day one, so you may want to start small and then grow big. When you start small, you want to still have the key things in mind. In some cases, the key things, if you ignore and if you try to incorporate from a security perspective, you may be introducing a risk. But if you also try to bring in later on, you may have to change more things in your application, like when you're doing a ENI switchover for your route tables. You don't want to ignore those kinds of costs that you may incur later on. So where we come to play is understanding your need and right-sizing that solution for you. You may be operating in one VPC, you may be operating in multiple VPCs, a control VPC structure, and a application or a business unit VPC structure. That's different from just operating in a VPC per business unit. There are different variations. That's where we kind of try to help you find the right solution. And working with, as I said, from almost from my days back at Amazon, I've been working with Sophos, and we've I think seen almost every scenario that that Sophos uh, customers ask, and what we have done um, is created a framework out of it. So again, the emphasis on DevOps, emphasis on time to market perspective. Um, we are very comfortable coming in with a framework. So Sophos has done a fantastic job in terms of creating the auto-scalable Sophos, ready to go framework. But when our customers pick it up, it's very hard to figure out all the possible use cases and scenarios, and I'll walk you through some of those. And it's practically impossible for Sophos or any vendor to try to customize that for every scenario. So what we've done is created some more frameworks to make it easy for you to address all the use cases that UTM offers. So when I talk about use cases, if you just take the encryption in transit use case, and you are leveraging VPNs, um, there are several VPNs. There's HTML5 VPNs, there is SSL VPNs, there is site-to-site tunnels for IPsec. So when do we use what? I mean, especially the HTML5 VPN, it's a very unique offering that Sophos has, which solves a major problem. Not a major, not a problem. It's um, uh, it exists because we want higher security, but at the same time, how can we be secure without compromising the convenience? Like, for example, you have temp files um, on multiple instances. You don't want to be sharing temp files across across your user base. So how Sophos can act as a really nice vault by putting those temp files, by storing those temp files, but giving access to your users on HTML5 VPN to your remote desktop or SSH sessions without sharing those temp files. But then you can apply a user profile-based two-factor authentication and give the users the right access to the right instances. It's a nice overlay, very convenient, very secure overlay, on top of, leveraging temp files on your instances. So those are good things. And then we talk about IDS, IPS. On the inbound side, they also have protection on the outbound egress traffic, and WAF, and and several good things that that we can help you. So I'm going to cover a few use cases here. One is our own use case, which is we have, as a managed service provider, we have multiple customer accounts. So we have a control account that we utilize to manage our customer accounts, and they're all secured. So if you see here, so the need we have is for our managed services resources, we want a single point of access. They want to be able to access Amazon console. They want to be able to access a Windows instance, a Linux instance. So what we've done is here they all have to authenticate against an Active Directory. There's an ADFS to be able to federate to the consoles of our customers, but also they have to hop on a tunnel to be able to access a client account. And again, if you are sharing these credentials like the PEM files, undoing or updating these credentials during an onboarding, offboarding process could get really messy, and managing those credentials could be difficult. But by using the HTML5 VPNs, it's really nice, secure, and convenient way of managing, managing environments. This next one is a very it's a genomics sequencing application, and in the life sciences space, and lots of our customers are interested in in having these data center connections so they can move the genome data and the results back and forth. In this particular case, we hit a problem where we had overlays of networks, meaning the same private IP address scheme that we were using or for our customer um, overlapped with their customers' private IP scheme. So in addition to having this secure tunneling mechanism, we had, Sophos made it really easy to be able to overlay a network. So we overcome that problem of having multiple, um, you know, the overlapping networking. But at the same time, they had special need into accessing the file servers and folders, like as if they're mountable files in their customer, in their customer environments. That problem was very easily solved, and it's been a very reliable environment that we were able to help our customers and our customers and customers. So in the last use case I'm talking about is a Internet of Things use case. In this case, it is a energy utility company, and their customers are large utilities. And the utilities, if you notice while you're driving on the highways, you will see along the electric lines, you'll see these big balls that, round objects that carry sensors in them that are constantly emitting information about humidity on the lines, voltage on the lines, these bits and pieces of data that are coming in come into a Sophos control account, which then we created on a per customer basis. We in this per customer here, the per utility company basis, we have multiple VPCs segregated, and those of you, and this is where the Amazon nuances come into play, is let's say you are only using a peering gateway between these VPCs. You want to have a nice transit control VPC so you can apply all the good things that Sophos offers like IDS, IPS, WAF, but also in addition for the traffic coming in and out, if you use peering gateways don't allow transit routing. As the name says, it's a gateway, it's not a router. So you cannot have the traffic go all the way back so easily unless you design this properly. So that was a very interesting use case for us to be able to allow this data move at scale and allowing customers come in and use the analysis. So one thing that I did emphasize is our DevOps, approach to the problems. In general, all these use cases, we kind of take a very DevOps-centric approach, and this is a painful thing that we evolved because, as you can imagine, you will have a lot of pain in terms of even something as simple as defining an IP address for a cider block that you want to build on Amazon could be a 3 weeks or 3 months conversation sometimes. So what we do is we created a turnkey framework that we click a button on day one. So if you're a migration use case, we can discover automatically, we can move your images, and then we can use these deployment frameworks to automate your deployment. But again, I do not consider anything DevOps that does not take a test-driven approach to it. So we have accelerators that do automated testing. What would normally take us 2 to 3 months now takes us like literally on day one, we have our pipelines ready, so we can apply performance testing, we can apply scale testing and security testing. So you can think of launching multiple versions of browsers and hitting your traffic. So those of you that were asking questions around how do I know what performance Sophos offers, it's more than usually the answer is it varies based on your workload. And in this case, we can help you come up with that answer very quickly. And also, because the OS 10 AppSec is built into this, you may configure Sophos, but you really have testing as a part of it. So that test-driven approach to it. And then if you're going into compliance, automating the documentation of the test results and the architecture and evidence collection process, so you can cut short your FedRAMP cycles or HIPAA cycles. That's the next automation phase. And the last is the automation of information. Some questions I see about logging and monitoring. How do we pull the data that Sophos, VPC flow logs, and CloudTrail, and bring this view to you where again the FedRAMP high is all about automation, and you get not a one-time security assessment, but on a continuous objective basis, a continuous scoring basis. All that information is in this bottom. We have a product called REAN Radar, which gives you an objective score of your security standard, and it also pulls in cost information. And to the extent that you're practicing DevOps and you're using tools like Jira, we can give you cost and security cost, not just from an Amazon cost perspective, but from a people cost perspective, the total, the cost of release and so on. And today I'm very excited to offer to you guys that are attending this webinar a test drive and a auto-scaled deployment of Sophos in your environment for free if you contact us. Right. I'll turn it over for Q&A at this point.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll go over some of the questions as you guys put your questions in here. We will go ahead and start. We'll review some of the questions that came in during the sessions that others might be interested in. There was a question if the UTM's end of life. The UTM's not end of life. They have a next-gen firewall, the XG, that's coming out. UTM's still current. Sophos also does function on the Gov Cloud. Unfortunately, there's not a marketplace on Gov Cloud currently, so it's more of a BYOL license there. There was another question about monitoring workspaces. As Bryan went through, workspaces is a great kind of use case for the Outbound gateway, which is actually where it was created from. Because me as an AWS employee, I have access to a workspaces account in our security group, and workspaces group were struggling to find a solution that would prevent me from going to malicious websites. So they worked with Sophos and were able to use the Outbound gateway solution to do outbound filtering for workspaces actually. So what you do in your workspaces VPC is you set the Outbound gateway as your default gateway, which actually that's done by the Queen, so it's all kind of automatic. And then the Outbound gateway will tunnel that traffic to the auto-scaling group of worker nodes, which then sends it out to the internet, after filtering and whatnot. Let's see here.
There's also a question about whether or not Sophos UTM could protect AWS from malware and ransomware attacks. And so Sophos UTM can be used to protect against malware and ransomware for specific applications and data. So in particular, the Sandstorm product allows you to denote files in a sandbox environment and to observe what someone might be trying to do. So the answer is yes.
There was also a number of questions about the slides being available. You should get a follow-up email after this webinar with a link to the slides that will be available.
Also, there are some questions about cost and compliance. As I mentioned, this is Sri with REAN Cloud. As I mentioned during my talk, we are happy to help you with making that cost, performance, or features. What features turn on in certain compliance requirements. Please feel free to contact us if you have further questions on that.
There's another question here about if AWS ELB is capable of filtering out or blocking traffic based on text in the request. Today, that's not really a capability of what we have. We just released the application load balancer, or ALB, which is kind of the next generation of the ELB. And today it can do path-based routing. So for instance, if you wanted to block traffic, you could, if it was in the headers, you could send it to a web group that would just basically drop the traffic. Otherwise, you're probably looking at something like Sophos to do more advanced and maybe even possibly regex and other types of blocking. But so the blocking traffic is not something the ELB does today. Let's see here. There was a question about how the Sophos is different from the AWS WAF service. So the AWS WAF service, again, was released last year during re:Invent, and it works on top of our CloudFront service, which is our content delivery network. So if you're already leveraging CloudFront for your CDN and you want to use WAF, then you can enable the AWS WAF, but it doesn't come with any rules by default. So at that point, you can define your own rules. You can get a little bit of blocking information as well. But it's fairly simple. The main advantages of it are that it's easy to enable if you're already using CloudFront, and you're able to drive the whole thing via APIs and just integrate in with the rest of CloudTrail and those, RNR logging and all of those types of services. For anything more advanced than that, which is admittedly at this point a lot of things, that's where you'd want to look at something like a Sophos WAF. One question is, how does AWS defend against insider attacks? So, a lot of these are available in the reports that we have for all different types of security and compliance requirements, ranging from, PCI, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, HIPAA, all those kinds of things. So we have controls and automation around access, doing basically our own internal intrusion detection on insider attacks. We've got very aggressive goals to reduce the amount of people who have access to anything internally. That's one of the major things we're continuously working on. We'd like to get to a point where no one has access, but obviously that has some challenges. So if you want further information on that, I would reach out to your account team, and they can get you some of those the more detailed reports where we document those types of security controls. Let's see here. Rich and Brian, you feel free to jump in here if you want to catch some of these other questions. There's a lot of them coming in.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Nick. I apologize. You're doing a great job. But, yeah, some of the questions you talked about GovCloud, we will be, later on this month, we'll be sending out a blog that walks customers through the GovCloud because, as you mentioned, there's not a marketplace there. So if you guys are interested in that, let us know. We'll send you, we'll do a blog that will walk a customer how they could get up and going in the GovCloud. So great question. There was a question here about integrating it with Splunk. So we do all our logging through syslogging. So you're more than welcome to just take those logs. We also have the CloudWatch log agent on our UTM, so you can plug those right into CloudWatch as well. We do have, I have seen some open source Splunk integrations that a couple of our customers have just kind of come up and created themselves. So if you guys are interested in that, you could check it out on our GitHub repository. And again, we'll follow up with that information as well. So it's, we've tried to put the product in a state where you can kind of play with it as much as you can, and so hopefully you'll be able to do that. But yeah, you can just take those logs directly into CloudWatch, and if you'd like to use the CloudWatch console to make your own reports, or you could use some, you could pipe those into Splunk as well. Let's see here. We had another question. Can Sophos restrict access for, I apologize, my screen's a little, can Sophos restrict access for the same user differently per device type. For example, user A connecting with their corporate laptop versus their personal mobile device. So Sophos itself doesn't have the ability to identify different devices per users, but you can do some things within AWS and with Sophos to do that. So we do have Active Directory integration. So if you want to tie that to a specific device, you could do some things there, or you could do something similar to what Amazon has done, where you would have an actual a rule set either by IP or some kind of network segment. So maybe your mobile devices on a different network segment that has different accesses and things like that. So there are some things you can do, and you can do some things through some of the automation. So it takes a little bit of working, but you can come up with some of those use cases to work with. Let's see. Just looking through some other ones.
If you have further questions on how to integrate with Splunk or Elk, we're happy to help you with that.
So there's one question here around the ALB and protecting against DDoS attacks like the normal load balancer, and how does that compare to Cloudflare? So one is, the vast majority of DDoS attacks are UDP based because of the way that they can do amplification attacks across the internet. And so neither ELB or ALB will take or request or accept UDP requests. So that's actually a very efficient way to block a lot of traditional DDoS attacks for more kind of targeted HTTP attacks. One of the benefits of both ELB and ALB is that it will auto-scale. But if your attacker is going at you faster than how ELB or ALB can scale up automatically, then that's where typically you'd want to use some type of CloudFront or CDN like Cloudflare to help out with that. So if you put your resources behind a CDN, including CloudFront, that's another effective way to do DDoS mitigation. So in that way, CloudFront and Cloudflare are fairly similar. Let's see here.
Thanks, Nick. It looks like there's another question here on when the AMI that supports high availability will be available in the marketplace. So that it's actually available today. So it's the same AMI that we have today. What we do in that scenario is we just have a CloudFormation template that takes your configuration settings, puts that into an S3 bucket, and then puts the UTM in an auto-scaling group and uses those health checks to check the status of the instance. And so once it fails, what happens is that triggers a process that then moves those configuration settings from the S3 bucket to the secondary UTM and then transfers over that elastic IP address. So it's there today. You can do it with a standalone, and then what you just need to do is deploy our CloudFormation template. So we'll follow up with in our email if you have questions. We have a knowledge base article that walks you through that. And again, you can get those templates through our GitHub repository, or you can get them from, we have an S3 bucket that we just have open for our users. There's two different flavors in HA, just so that you're available. There's what we call a warm standby and a cold standby. In the cold standby, the EC2 instance has not been spun up, so it's just kind of a lying in wait, and then once that auto-scaling group fails the health check, it'll spin up that EC2 instance and spin that over those settings. The warm standby then just has an EC2 instance running and just waiting for those configuration settings to go over. So again, it's available today. It's the same AMI we have. It's just a different CloudFormation template. We'll make sure to get that to you. And then there was another question here about, and I think you talked about this, Nick, but just to be safe, the BYOL is only in the Gov Cloud. And that's correct. Gov Cloud doesn't have a marketplace, so it's just BYOL. We do have trials, though, so if you're interested in like a 30-day BYOL trial, feel free to give us a ping, and we can get you that license. You can try that out. Today we have our standalone UTM that's available, so the high availability UTM is there. And then our auto-scaling with the OGW will be published here later this month.
I think there's a question about IP reputation.
And
are you guys able to do IP reputation on Sophos?
That's a good question. So today we do have an IP filtering list, and you can put in your own IP address, but we don't have a service that actually does a reputation. We do have an update that does like signatures for IPS and things of that nature, but nothing IP specific.
And then for remote access, was there any way to be able to handle different device types and contexts? So for instance, like doing certificate-based authentication based upon whether or not they're on a remote device or a laptop?
Yeah, so you can do some certificate authentication. You can also you can also use us to do a self-signed certificate. So if you'd like to do it that way, you can do it as well. But if you'd like to import your certificate and have it reside on the UTM, you can do that as well.
Okay, and then if they want to run the UTM within GovCloud, who would they contact?
So we've got an email alias, and let me just get it out today, but we'll make sure it's in the deck. So it's just aws.marketplace@sophos.com, and that'll hit the entire team that deals with the Sophos products in AWS. We've got when we publish the auto-scaling release for GovCloud next week, we'll have a knowledge base article, so we could share that with you. But yeah, please feel free to ping us on that email address. If you have any questions, we'll follow up. And that was it. I'm not seeing any more questions. Did you see anything on your side, Nick?
I think that's it. All right. Well,
Great.
thanks everyone for joining. I hope you guys got some value out of this, and I will look for some more details in the email that goes out afterwards.